The Waco History Podcast is sponsored by Brotherwell Brewing on historic Bridge Street in Waco.
Welcome to the Waco History Podcast. We're going to air for you over the next few months a special series of Waco History Living Stories. These were segments that were originally aired on KWBU here in Waco. They were produced by the Institute for Oral History editor, Michelle Holland, and narrated by two fabulous narrators, Louis Mazé and Kim Patterson. And so these highlight oral histories from the collection of the Institute for Oral History at Baylor University, which I direct, which has been around since 1970 and has over 1,000 interviews related to Waco and McLennan County history. And we're happy to highlight those here.
Cross the Brazos at Waco, ride hard and I'll make it by dawn.
This episode of Living Stories brings you a spooky story, or maybe it's not, but it's about the ghost of South 10th Street.
Then the night came alive with gunfire.
This is Living Stories, featuring voices from the collections of the Baylor University Institute for Oral History. I'm Louis Mazé. Everyone loves a good ghost story, especially when it involves their neck of the woods. Around the summer of 1915, South Waco found itself with a resident ghost. Mary Kemendo Sendón, who was in high school at the time, recalls when her aunt first spotted the otherworldly figure.
She had been sitting by the window that night, and the next morning she told my mother, she said, "You know, I saw something down the street last night. I think I saw a ghost." I was looking out the window, I says I was half asleep, and all of a sudden I saw this figure in a long, flowing white robe coming down the street. And she said, I got up to get a better look, and by the time I got up, that figure disappeared. Well, my mother thought maybe it was a dream that she had, you know, and Mama said, well, and another night or two passed, and the same thing happened.
News of the mysterious appearances got out, and the Waco newspaper covered the story.
It said, Ghost of South 10th Street, and had our address, said across the street from our address. And it really was a sensation, because that night people were coming, sitting on the curb in front of our house, up and down the street. They lined the entire street, sitting on the curb, waiting to see if they were going to see the ghost. It went on for 2 or 3 nights. They didn't give up. Well, it got to the point where they were bringing their lunch and eating their lunch, and even, you know, of course, thank goodness they didn't have radios in those days, because we would have had music all up and down the street, but it was noisy. They would bring bedrolls and sleep out there until early hours of the morning, because when my aunt saw this, it was around 3 o'clock in the morning. So they wouldn't come in until about 10, just when we were ready to go to bed, and there they were.
Interest gradually dwindled, and people stopped flocking to their address at night. But Sendón describes what happened one night a little later on, when she and her sister were sleeping in the front hall.
We had hardly gone to sleep when there was a tap on the door. I jumped up, and my dad heard it at the same time, and he was right behind me. And there stood this figure in a white robe, white nightgown it was, with a teacup in her hand. And my father said, "What do you want?" She said, "Do you have any whiskey?" My father said, "No." Well, she started down the steps with her teacup.
It turned out that the ghost of South 10th Street was a neighbor's alcoholic cousin who was visiting from Chicago. The neighbor finally confided in Sendón's father that he could not keep her from roaming the streets at night in search of whiskey. So the mystery of the ghost was solved, but with a heartbreaking finding. For more information about this program or the Institute for Oral History, visit us at baylor.edu/living stories.
Thanks for listening to the Waco History Podcast. Like what you heard? Subscribe, rate, and review our show on iTunes so we can reach more listeners. You can find show notes and info on every episode at wacohistorypodcast.com, and more info on Waco's past at wacohistory.org. Our theme music, used with permission, is Cross the Brazos at Waco, performed by the late Billy Walker. For more info on Billy's music, go to billywalker.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
When I reach San Antonio.
This has been a Rogue Media podcast.